What is up, weather enthusiasts? I'm your host, Pat's Path Predictor. Let's get right into the weather. Alright, so here's the situation we have for you, ladies and gentlemen. Tropical Depression 4 is continuing to organize at a rather quick pace at this current point, as the center of circulation is now just off the coast of Cuba into the Gulf of Mexico, and we're starting to see more convection flare up near the center of circulation. We still have a lot of convection mainly to the south of it right now, but that is starting to show signs of it starting to flare up closer to the center of circulation. And over the last hour, we've been seeing a lot of convection bursting near over here. So it's going to be a pretty interesting situation how this whole thing plays out. But regardless, we had the latest from the National Hurricane Center at this current point in time. Depression starting to move into the southeastern Gulf of Mexico. Tropical storm warnings issued for portions of the Florida Keys, and we'll get to those in just a second. But here's the situation that we have. Its current location is 23.1 degrees north, 82.6 degrees west. It is about 15 miles west-northwest of Havana, so it's just offshore. And it is maximum sustained winds have increased to 35 miles per hour. They were at 30 miles per hour last night on stream, and it's currently moving west-northwest at 15 miles per hour, so it has slowed down a little bit as it's getting off shore, and is expected to continue to slow down as it approaches the Big Bend region of Florida. Minimum central pressure is 1,009 millibars, which has been a bit of a slight decrease in the pressure, and that's expected to continue throughout the day. At this current point in time, we have now a hurricane watch in effect for Indian Pass to Yankeetown, and we can go ahead and show you that graphic over here. We can go ahead and pull up the warnings as well as the cone. We have tropical storm warnings pretty much from the Big Bend all the way down to the west coast of Florida and parts of the Florida Keys, and we have hurricane watches from the Apalachicola Bay all the way through the Big Bend, as this does have a big possibility of strengthening up into a hurricane before it moves into the and make landfall and then enters the southwestern Atlantic Ocean over here. So that's what we're paying attention to. If a hurricane warning does go out, it'll likely be either tonight or very early tomorrow morning. So we're going to have to pay attention to it. And this thing is now expected to make landfall on Monday morning. So we're going to have to keep very close tabs on it, and we will keep you updated here on the Pat's Path Predictor channel in that regard. Here's what we have going on with the latest. Recent satellite wind data and surface observations from the Florida Keys indicate that the maximum sustained winds are still 35 miles per hour with higher gusts. Slow strengthening is forecast this afternoon and tonight, and the depression is expected to become a tropical storm by tonight. A faster rate of strengthening is expected by Sunday through Monday, and the system could be hurricane strength as it reaches near the Florida Gulf Coast. We can go ahead and pull up the discussion because we had some pretty interesting wording from last night, and we have some pretty interesting warning from today. Tropical Depression 4 has become somewhat better organized this morning, with the circulation becoming better defined over western Cuba and curved convective bands forming close to the center of the southern semicircle. However, the circulation is still somewhat elongated, with multiple low-level vortices centers rotating around the mean center. The initial intensity has increased to 30 knots based on surface observations. The depression is now starting to make its northwestern turn towards the initial motion, now at 300 degrees at 13 knots, which is 15 miles per hour. And that's just mainly some technical jargon that we're going to have to pay attention to from there. But we can go ahead and kind of dissect this. A large mid to upper level trough is creating a breakdown in the subtropical ridge, and the cyclone is expected to turn northward as this system in the next 24 is expected to continue that. It's expected to follow that gradual turn to the northeast by 60 hours. The motion should bring the center near landfall in roughly 48 hours. After landfall, weakening and steering currents should cause the cyclone to slow down while it moves northeastward over portions of Florida and Georgia. After the system crosses Cuba and emerges in the eastern Gulf, the environment and oceanic conditions are favorable for intensification. Due to a lack of internal organization, the initial intensification is likely to be slow. However, a faster rate of development is likely once the system gets better organized, and the cyclone is likely to be near or at hurricane strength when it reaches the Gulf Coast. Weakening is forecast beyond 72 hours once it gets due to land interaction. Beyond 72 hours, the initial forecast remains quite uncertain due to the uncertainty of whether the center will remain over the land or reach the Atlantic, and how much interaction will occur through the aforementioned mid-latitude trough interaction. We can go ahead and show you the cone once again, because as this thing gets off the coast of Georgia right here, it starts to slow down considerably. And there is a possibility that if this does go offshore, this could intensify and strengthen once again. And we've seen several hurricane models indicating that this could reach hurricane strength. We've seen some voluntary evacuation orders issued for coastal parts of western Florida. Please listen to your local officials in that regard. And if they are asking you to evacuate, that's what they're recommending, and that's what you should do. I'm not going to say you should evacuate here in the Pat's Path Predictor channel. I'm going to defer that to local officials because they know that better than I can. But in the meantime, we can go ahead and show you some satellite imagery. I can understand where they're going through, at least based on the satellites. I can go ahead and show you the true color as well, because they are indicating that there is some areas of rotation that's kind of rotating around the mean center of circulation. That's going to kind of fix itself as it gets closer, as it moves deeper into the Gulf of Mexico and moves closer to the loop current. That's going to end up fixing itself probably in the next 6 hours or so, and then from then on out, intensification is possible, and this thing will have a bunch of capital to play with. Regardless, this thing is still organizing at a pretty robust pace, and we have a lot of stuff that we're going to have to pay attention to. And the outflow on this, first of all, not just here, but on the southern side, it has dual outflow channels, which is pretty concerning to say the very least, because that's an indicator that this thing is organizing pretty quickly, and we could see that low-level center of circulation fully close off and fully kind of have one condensed center in the next few hours, and that's pretty concerning to pay attention to, and that's concerning what we're looking at right there. I'll have to look at the next discussion when it comes out in a couple of hours at the time of recording this video to kind of see what they're potentially looking at. But regardless, yeah, we're still seeing a lot of thunderstorm activity over parts of Florida. You're going to have to pay attention to it. For now, the main risk is flash flooding, although surge values have increased across parts of Florida, particularly in the Big Bend. They are now calling for 3 to 5 feet of surge from the Alukia River all the way to Arapeca down here near the Tampa Bay region. Over here, 2 to 4 feet from Indian Pass to the Alukia River, which is near Apalachicola Bay. 2 to 4 feet for the Tampa Bay region, 1 to 3 feet for southwestern and southern Florida, and 1 to 2 feet of surge for dry tortugas. If this thing continues to intensify and this thing continues to strengthen up to a hurricane, I could definitely see those surge values go increase from 3 to 5 to maybe 4 to 6 or potentially 4 to 7 feet of surge, depending on how large this system gets. It's not exactly the largest system in the world, but it is definitely starting to organize and get to that rate, so we're going to have to pay attention to it. And it does have good conditions for quick organization and quick development, including moist air, which we can go ahead and start with right here from the satellite imagery. It has a lot of moist air, predominantly because it has a lot of convective activity that's mixing out whatever dry air is in the eastern Atlantic Ocean right now, and it's going to continue as the system starts to move towards the western Florida and kind of move towards the Big Bend. There's going to be plenty of moist air in affiliation with it. There is going to be a little bit of dry air to the western part of it, but because the wind shear, which we will get to in a second, is relatively low, overall, I'm not too concerned with that at this current point in time, so that's something to pay attention to. Once again, there's no Sahara dust that's going to stop this system from developing. We still have those dual outflow channels right there, which is something you absolutely do not want to see if you are seeing an organizing system. You're seeing bursts of convection continue to fire up close to the center of circulation. That's kind of an indication that this thing's continuing to organize, and we're seeing convection starting to kind of link up from the southern side towards the center of circulation, and same with the northern side. We're seeing just huge bursts of convection across the entire system moving through there, so we're going to have to keep tabs on it, and this is going to be something that we're going to have to nowcast, but because the system has initialized and it's developed, we can now use hurricane models with a little bit less of a grain of salt. But regardless of that, we are still paying very close attention to very warm waters. Where this thing is at right now, it's in 30 degrees Celsius of waters, and it's already taking full advantage of that. And I said this before, and I'll say this again, if this thing had moved north of Cuba or moved through Cuba, like through the Cuban island and stayed inland, this thing would not have developed. We would not be talking about a tropical depression right now. We'd be talking about potential tropical cyclone 4. But because this thing moved south of Cuba, and we finally figured it out after the stream last night, I know Tristan was saying the center relocated. That's not exactly what happened. what ended up happening was the low-level center of circulation. It ended up finally drilling down and dropping around southern Cuba because there wasn't really a mid-level center of circulation that was dealing with. It was just broad rotation at that point. In the low-level center of circulation, which is what you need for tropical development to initialize, and that's kind of at around 850 millibars, which is about 5,000 feet up. But you need that low-level center of circulation for tropical development to begin. It ended up finally drilling through, and it drilled further south than what we were anticipating, and that's why the system was was south of Cuba, and that's why it developed on stream last night, which honestly was a pretty big highlight of that. Also, Tristan's debut was pretty fun to do that, which, by the way, there will be a link to that video for it's on the Storms United channel. I hope you guys check that out because I think it was pretty funny. I really am happy of how that came out, and regardless of what you think about it, I think Tristan's a good person to have on the team because he offers a good perspective. He offers stuff that we don't even consider, and I really like that from him. But regardless, I know I'm going off on a bit of a tangent, but we'll go ahead and show you another thing I'm watching right now. Where this thing is moving right now, it's over 150 OHC, which is another reason why I'm very concerned about this. Because it's going to be clipping the eastern part of the loop current where there's still over 100 OHC as this approaches the Big Bend. I'm mainly paying attention to the sea surface temperatures, but even still, we're looking at 30 to 31 to potentially 32 degrees Celsius of water all the way up to the Big Bend region. And from here on out, the OHC, what that's going to end up doing is it's going to start tapping into that. It's not just going to tap into the sea surface temperatures. It's going to tap into how deep those waters are, and it's going to potentially allow for this thing to fuel up and continue to intensify once that thing starts going, which arguably it already has. It was 30 miles per hour before. Now it's 35 miles per hour. So arguably it's already starting to, and arguably we are starting to see better organization with this. So OHC is pretty big, and where that's at, it's at about 150 OHC just off the coast of Cuba. It is going to drop off a little bit, but then it's going to continue to rise to about 125 and then level off around 100 OHC all the way up until the Big Bend region, so we're going to have to pay very close attention to that. One other thing I'm paying attention to as well is wind shear. There's no wind shear that in front of this thing. There's like 10 knots of wind shear, which is really good for tropical development because you need some shear to get things going, but you don't need but you need a perfect amount, which is about 10 to 15 knots of wind shear for this thing to really go and for this thing to really organize. And overall, because of this low wind shear, I'm not going to have very many concerns of a dry air intrusion because how dry air gets into tropical systems is shear starts to kind of tear it apart and allows for dry air to get into the core and potentially choke it out. That's not going to happen this time, and whatever wind shear that was there last night on stream in the Western Gulf, it's gone. It's weakened, and we are seeing some of the best shear conditions, at least this early August has to offer, so we're going to have to keep tabs on it, and that's why I'm updating you with this stuff. And we're going to go ahead and also show you the shear forecast and the moisture forecast courtesy of the European model, just to kind of prove my point as well. Let's go ahead and start with the wind shear values right here. Here's the shear that we have. Now, this is what we have going on. I know this has a bunch of shear up further to the northeast of the system. I don't think that's the case, and I think part of this can be attributed to the storm itself or the outflow that is affiliated with this, because there is dual outflow channels with this based on satellite imagery, and based on the satellite, there's really no shear around to start tearing the system apart. So overall, I don't really think there's much going on around it. But if there is a little bit of shear, it could bring a little bit of shear to the west of it, especially if it's at an angle. It definitely could enhance a bit of the outflow, especially that southern outflow that's moving towards the Yucatan Peninsula. If that shear starts to ramp up and pick that up. Because that would be an interesting situation to see how that played out. Regardless, you start to see the shear. It's going to be in a relatively low sheared environment all the way through. And yeah, there is going to be a bit of a trough that picks up in wind shear. But if that outflow can get into that, at least by the time it starts to approach the Big Bend region, you could definitely see some pretty decent strengthening with that, as that's going to help tighten the circulation quite a bit. So that's ultimately something we're keeping tabs on. And that's ultimately something we're paying attention to. And that's why we're so uncertain with the intensity of this. And that's why there's models that are going all over the place with this. Moisture, we can go ahead and show you that. It's in a relatively strong moisture pocket right now. And there is going to be a little bit of dry air in the Gulf of Mexico, most likely due to a cold front that's going to be pushing in the next few hours. However, based on the fact that there's not going to be much wind shear, I wouldn't expect that much of a dry air intrusion unless the system doesn't develop convection. I'd say in the next 24 hours, and some wind shear starts to develop over here and picks it up and puts dry air into the core of the system, which would absolutely delay its development right there. But considering that I'm not seeing that very much, and considering that there's still a bunch of convection firing up and providing ample moisture in that part of the Gulf of Mexico, I don't think there's going to be much of a dry air intrusion. I don't think there's going to be that large of a problem with that. So we're going to have to pay attention to it. But one thing I will say is if it ends up going off the coast of Georgia and off the east coast of Florida, there's going to be a lot more moist air to play with, and those are going to arguably have better conditions for rapid strengthening and rapid development because you have the Gulf Stream, you still have low wind shear, and we can go ahead and show you that. There's still a very big pocket of low wind shear over here, and you have a lot more moist air to work with, and that could cause some even worse problems, especially if this thing stalls off the coast and makes landfall in the Carolinas as a stronger system than anticipated. So that's what we're paying attention to as well. There's a bunch of indications that this could happen according to a lot of the models, and we can go ahead and we're going to show you that in just a second. But before we do, I want to highlight one last thing very quickly. Here's the 0Z runs real quickly. I want to show you the European as well, just to kind of give you an indication of what may end up happening, because we're getting some signals in the Caribbean Sea once again, and we're getting a lot of signals in the Gulf of Mexico. So that's something you need to keep very close tabs on as hurricane season starts to ramp up, because what we're noticing is there's a tropical wave that's currently in the main development region moving towards the Lesser Antilles. This is the tropical wave in question right here. The NHC hasn't really tagged anything right now, but there is plenty of model support to kind of back it up. And I want to go ahead and check, see if the NHC, yeah, they have not tagged anything just yet in that regard, but we are watching it because this could start to organize and develop in the Caribbean Sea as wind shear starts to decrease in that part, and then really start to ramp up when it enters the western Gulf of Mexico, as some models are indicating at this current point in time. Regardless, this is still something you need to pay attention to, and we will continue to keep tabs here for you at this current point. Regardless, though, we need to go ahead and start showing you some forecast models. We're going to show you some operational models, and then we're going to go ahead and show you some hurricane models just to show you what we're potentially looking at. Here's the European to start with. European wants this thing to make landfall as a tropical storm, around 60-mile-per-hour winds as it approaches the Big Bend. It's going to be a bit of an eastern lopsided system according to this right here, and then it's going to move through Florida and move just off the coast where it stalls and starts to quickly strengthen down to a 983 millibar system and a mid-range Category 1 hurricane before making landfall south of Charleston, South Carolina. And then I know I got a couple of comments about Columbia, but if the European model is the one that holds, Columbia could definitely get some heavy rain and very gusty winds, like tropical storm force winds with this, if this model holds. This is just one model, and we can go ahead and show you the GFS run with this. Here's the GFS right here. We can show you the GFS wants this thing to quickly intensify down to a mid-range category, up to a mid-range Category 1 hurricane as it makes landfall in the Big Bend region, then moves just off the coast and starts to quickly organize and then make landfall near Savannah, Georgia, and bring some potential tropical storm conditions through the Carolinas right here. Flooding is going to be a big threat for that region over here. The NHC has been kind of highlighting it as rainfall potential off the coast of South Carolina over here is 12 to 16 inches just on the coast right there. So we're going to have to pay close attention to it. Here's the CMC model, where you have CMC wants this thing to be a strong tropical storm, and it interestingly wants this thing to make landfall in the Florida Panhandle and stay on shore and weaken due to land interaction. Kind of interesting setup right there to pay attention to. Here's the Icon model right here. Icon wants this thing to be a tropical storm, then moves off the coast of the Carolinas, and then quickly strengthens to a low 970s millibar system, which would be a Category 2 hurricane before making landfall in North Carolina And that's kind of the stuff we're paying attention to. I've also been watching the hurricane models. They're all indicating a hurricane strength system of some degree, so we're going to have to pay close attention to it. But regardless, I do believe a hurricane is likely at this current point, and so does the NHC based on their on some of their guidance and some of their discussions. So we'll keep tabs on that for you. Be sure to leave a like and subscribe to the channel if you are new. It helps us out, helps us get more videos out like these. The goal of this channel, as always, is to get more people engaged with weather. Be sure to join my Patreon. It's the first link in the description down below. And if you want to come hang out with us at Storms United, be sure to join our Discord server. Link to that is right over there. Shout out to Taniel for being an official sponsor of the Pat's Path Predictor channel. And with that being said, have a wonderful day, guys. Stay safe.